Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuned in from the world. Welcome to our panel discussion on energy storage, a value proposition for a sustainable future. We're truly very, very excited here. We've got a great team, a list of panelists to explore this topic, a very relevant topic, and especially with all that's going on in the world right now. My name is Haroon, the Director of Renewables at McKim Creed. And joining me live today, we've got Michael, we've got Patrick, we've got Sharif, and we've got Ivan from the utilities as well as energy storage companies. Before we launch right into all of this, just some logistics. Feel free to type in questions in live, and we'll do our best to answer them as we're going through our panel discussion. But we'll also have allocated 10 or 15 minutes at the end of this 1 hour session to go through some specific questions as well. So once again, welcome to our panel discussion, and we're looking forward to sharing in the wisdom of the collective on energy storage. So starting, let me share my screen right here. We have Sharif Abdul from Duke Energy. So Sharif, take it away.
Sure. So introduce myself real quick. So my name is Sharif Abdul at most first energy storage enthusiast. I'm the Director of Energy Storage and Microgrid Engineering at Duke Energy. So my team designs and supports development of energy storage and microgrid projects, both in Duke Energy's regulated footprint, in addition to throughout the nation through Duke Energy Sustainable Solutions. Looking forward to this panel discussion, and Sol, thank you for organizing it.
Thank you so much. All right. Moving on to Michael Carple from Wartsila.
Hi, I'm Michael Carple. I'm with Wartsila. Wartsila is a leading global integrator with other kinds of energy solutions kind of coming from our parent company for both hardware and software solutions. Personally, I've been in renewables for a little over 12 years, coming from the solar world, and I've been doing batteries since 2015, previously at Tesla and Nextracker, before coming to Wartsila almost a year ago. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Michael. Patrick, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, everybody. Patrick Shell, we're for Tampa Electric Company. It's a vertically integrated utility. relatively small service area and compact, but very dense in terms of energy usage. I'm the Director of Asset Management for supply and delivery. And, particularly from our perspective, given our size, we have a very aggressive solar investment that we're making. I can see some of the numbers there. We're currently just around 700 megawatts AC of solar in our area, but we're going to double that. That's pretty significant because now we're talking about almost 20% of our energy coming from solar. So storage is obviously a really important element in understanding and dealing with that challenge. That's it. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you, Patrick. And last but not least, we have Ivan from Powin.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Ivan Roguera. I am with Powin, leading battery storage integrator. We are based out of Portland, Oregon. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we've deployed over 1.5 gigawatt hours of battery storage worldwide. And I think the theme of this discussion is probably going to center around energy storage at scale. And I think that's kind of the theme for 2022, if you ask me. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ivan. So myself, as I mentioned, I've been working in over 10 years plus in this field. I've certainly seen my share of a lot of the evolution and changes of what's been going on in energy storage. I'm quite curious to see where do we take it from now going forward. And let me just stop sharing my screen right there. And with everything that's going on, I think we have a great opportunity to really kind of take this to the next level. And I'm curious, panelists, what do you think are some of the challenges we're really facing right now in energy storage?
I'll add one kind of to the mix. There's definitely no shortage of challenges there, but one that I'd like to mention is basically the upfront design of battery systems. I feel like it's not as targeted or accurate as many other technologies like solar systems, especially around degradation and how we're estimating that currently as an industry. I recently wrote an article on LinkedIn about this very topic. I've seen various ways folks are modeling degradation, and one very kind of ubiquitous way is this flexible performance guarantee scaling. The level of accuracy there is just subpar, and the fear is that a lot of people are either going to get burned because battery systems don't live out to what they expect, and a lot of projects may not see the light since when you have uncertainty, you become conservative, and a lot of these consultants become very conservative in that manner. So projects are not financially feasible. So that's definitely one challenge that I'll add to the mix here. But I'll interested to learn kind of what others have to add.
Yeah, Sharif, as Patrick, I'd really build off of where you left off there. The cost challenge, right? Your utility like Tampa Electric, where we're investing heavily in solar, we know storage is valuable because not only do we have cyclic loads from our customers, now that we got cyclic generation that I no longer is at my control to simply introduce more coal or natural gas to a fossil plant. I have to now somehow store that energy. And the range of possible outcomes in the next 5 years are incredible, right? It could be that we're aggregating very disaggregate, smaller storage solutions, or we could be really coupling this, not only just AC to DC, but DC to DC coupling this with our solar plants. Those, where the state of technology is rapidly changing right now. And that's where our questions come in. And those are our challenges that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think you guys hit on some really good points. We like if we zoom out a little bit and we talk about the greater challenge of um, climate change in general and the rapid scale we're trying to deploy at in order to meet some of these targets, execution is really, really challenging. And in that execution, there's all the earlier phases which we can get into, but to Sharif and Patrick's point, we don't have the operating history and data to really be able to model these as accurately as we'd like. That's the performance end of things, but I would also argue the value stream's not as simple. With solar, you can use PV-Syst, for example, to really accurately understand what a plant might do. So that equation's gotten more complicated, as Sharif said. But on the other side of it, it's not like you're just measuring a PPA at a point and putting a value to that. There's value stacking. There's theoretical value that may exist in one market and may not exist in another market, and there may be barriers to accessing that value depending on how the project is designed and sort of interpreted and what the interconnection says. So predicting the performance in order to capture the value, but also the value itself is a challenge.
Yeah, I'd just like to add. I mean, Sharif, you brought up a good point about state of health, and I think that's why it's important to do business in energy storage with bankable companies that can stand behind performance guarantees like that. But the real challenge to scaling energy storage, in my mind, is supply chain. Starting 6 months ago, and probably before that with COVID. I mean, even now with the supply challenges we have, I think the supply chain is going to be the key to really deploying as much energy storage as we need. And it's only growing because, as Patrick mentioned, all these renewable assets need to be DC coupled to get the most efficiency and really capture that clipped energy.
Yeah, and I think on the supply chain, right? Shall we elaborate for the viewers that may be less aware of it? I
Please.
think there's maybe three things with the supply chain that concern me the most. Um, First of all, while I'm talking, go ahead and just Google lithium carbonate index, and you can look at that in the background while we talk about it. But one, the supply chain's really concentrated in a particular area of Asia, both from the products coming out of it and the raw materials. So even some uh, products not coming from that main country, China, a lot of the raw materials still are coming from it. The second is just the overall supply and demand. Every time an EV company like Ford says they're going to double the output of the F-150 Lightning, which looks great, that affects the supply chain really dramatically. And then just the pricing volatility in general. Um, we need predictable costs, to Sharif's point, to be able to plan out how these projects are going to perform and make sure that they're paid for. But the supply chain is as such where it's harder to predict those costs than we'd like right now.
Agreed. And so I think probably at this point, if we can bring up that slide on degradation, I think kind of as we talk about it, it'll help kind of convey the point more. Are we able to pull that up right now? Oh,
Yes, I can do that right now. Give me 1 second. As we're doing that, what I found interesting is, in terms of the renewable energy landscape that we have it right now, particularly with PV, predictability has been one of the biggest challenges, and capacity factor and the like, as we know. And my understanding is that with energy storage, it helps us more with that predictability, more to fill in that capacity factor and the like. But yet it also seems to come with it brings with it challenges of its own, some of which do entail unpredictability in addition. And we can launch right into that in a moment. But to your point, Sharif, can Can you see this slide on degradation right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
perfect.
Appreciate it. And, I'll just go back real quick to a point that Ivan made. This underscores the importance of working with large, bankable entities that will stand behind their performance guarantees. And I think that's how everyone today is backing their projects and ensuring that they'll be protected. One thing that, even with that protection that I feel kind of the industry is deprived of is having that level of intelligence and certainty upfront in the design phase, way before you're getting ready to issue a PO to a Powin or to a Samsung or CATL or any other OEM, which is when you would get your performance guarantee and your state of health degradation estimates, so you would know actually how big of a beginning of life energy capacity you actually need. So like I said, what's happening today, since there's that gap, what developers and some consultants are doing, they're taking these performance guarantees from past projects and linearly interpolating them to be indicative of future projects. So, if you get 3% degradation per year from let's just say 100 megawatt hours throughput, you'll just assume that you'll get double that from 200 megawatt hours throughput. Very, very high level, very, very inaccurate. And the slide shown here basically has the battery state of health on the y-axis compared versus number of cycles. And if you just look at the 2000 cycle mark, right, and notice the difference between these lines, and I'll just back up a bit. Each of these lines represents cycling the battery or a battery, lithium battery, at 10%, but just at different center states of charge. So the purple, is at an average state of charge of 90%. So you'd be cycling it from 95% down to 85%, back and forth, and so on for kind of the other curves. So you can see the percentage difference in the level of degradation just by moving where that 10% depth of discharge is being cycled. And you can notice that it is not at all something that's neglectable or you can kind of brush under the rug. So, like I said, kind of flexible performance guarantees, scaling is, that's being done today may kind of hurt a lot of people. So there's definitely a need to kind of, for us as an industry, to get better at that.
Sharif, connected with what Saul was asking, or kind of kicked it off there as you switched into the slides. He was asking about, what is the value, and I think the value goes to what your function. What are you trying to achieve? So when I look at this curve, I think of, oh wow, I want to flatten out the output of a variable solar plant. Well, it's going to cycle, right? It's going to cycle a lot. You're going to be in that kind of situation. Or am I in an arbitrage situation where, hey, I just need to save up energy while it's cheap and then discharge it once while it's expensive? I think those are a lot of the thoughts where it gets into very much a integrated resource planning question. And the number of tools and the complexity of that question is much more than it used to be, particularly when you begin to add the customer side resources and storage capabilities.
Yeah, I think those are great points, and that's why it's so important to work with a partner that you trust as you're going through your journey in energy storage, because to your point, the use case completely drives how this works. And sometimes when I talk to my customers, they don't even fully understand the use case. And it's something that we have to work together on, because there's fairly simple use cases, but especially when you start trying to extract as much revenue as possible with value stacking, maybe there's a primary capacity use case to give a baseline to the financiers in a model, but then really you're not going to be successful unless you have a good merchant strategy. And especially with merchant strategies, some markets may be very shallow and may be very good for 1 or 2 years, but then you might want to switch the use case in the middle of that battery life. So frequency, I think, is very much talked about because it's tends to be highly valuable, but it's a very shallow market. And so at the deployment scale we have, I think in CAISO, for example, we had a few hundred megawatts online a couple of years ago, and we put on the gigawatts last year, and we're expected to put on gigawatts this next year, and it's supposed to double in just that area alone in the next 5 years on a per year basis. And so as the market penetration changes and the energy landscape changes, it's not like even within one of these curves, you're switching between the curves in real time potentially.
Exactly.
So what I'm hearing from you guys here is understanding what you're trying to achieve with energy storage up front is really critical. That is the use case in driving how you're going to deploy and the merits you're going to reap from the energy storage as the system evolves.
And design it.
Pardon me?
Yeah, and how you're going to design it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
I'd like to just add something to that. I mean, Sharif makes a good point about this data, which so I think it gets to the point of when you're evaluating energy storage systems of different technologies, just take that into account when comparing them, because they may be apples to oranges in terms of degradation and how they behave over time. So I would just say that, especially as it relates to storage chemistries.
Exactly. So we kind of lose that very, very awesome virtue you have when you're working on PV syst and you're comparing solar modules and you're thinking about using a thin film versus a monocrystalline. And when you think about it, at that level you're at the production estimate, you're at 98% accuracy or so. But if when you're doing the same thing for an energy storage project, even if you understand very, very well the profile that your battery system is going to execute, you don't have a very good way to estimate the beginning of life capacity, which batteries are expensive. They, in the grand scheme of things, they represent about 40%, like the cells themselves, 40% or so of project cost. So that's just a big unknown, or kind of a very impactful unknown to have, like early on in the project.
Yeah, and I think kind of zooming back out to the original question, what are some of the risks here? We're all very focused on deploying lithium right now because energy storage is still relatively early in the journey that we are envisioning for ourselves. But if we look at that end state and we look at the end goal of having a completely renewable world, or a near completely renewable world, we may need different technologies. We'll probably need different technologies for things like longer duration, which could be defined as multi-day or seasonal storage, as well as just 8 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours, things like that. And so one concern I have is the markets and the discussion being so focused on lithium, which has a track record and scalability from us sharing it with our phones and our laptops and electronics and electric vehicles, where we're complaining about the amount of data we have right now for lithium. We need to deploy other technologies now so that we can have the data and the track records in order for financiers, insurers, all the other peripheral stakeholders that make our industry go, comfortable enough to bet on those technologies when we need them. We can't just get to 60, 70, 80, 90%, solar penetration levels, for example, and then start thinking about how we're going to have power for 2 weeks if, the fires in California that keep happening lower solar production, or it's not windy for a week at a time, things like that. So, there's a lot of technologies out there, and sometimes the discussion focuses a little bit, and I just have a concern of making sure that all of those technologies have a chance to breathe.
So when you say all of them, so Michael, are you talking about deploying beyond just lithium, but perhaps alternative or other energy storage technologies? Am I following you correctly, or could you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, and I've experienced in my career with both lithium and flow batteries, and I've taken a look at a handful of other technologies. I'm sure, Sharif, I think you guys have maybe tested a number of other technologies at Duke. So I may not be the best person to speak of it, but there's other electrochemicals, so non-lithium chemistries. I think like Powin Energy, for example, has like an iron air battery, but it's more or less like still a solid state battery. It's just a different chemistry. You have flow batteries, you have mechanical, which is like flywheels, for example, gravity, where we think of pumped hydro. There's also some other technologies out there that use gravity type systems. So pluses and minuses for all of these things. By the way, storing hydrogen fuels is a very common topic right now as well. So all those different technologies.
Yeah, and you may be aware, kind of Duke has a very forward-thinking carbon reduction goals. For 2030, 50% carbon neutrality, and 2050 total carbon neutrality. So to meet that, we've been looking. We've recognized that lithium may not be the only resource or way to reach that. It's certainly a very viable solution, but hey, we need to start looking at all the other technologies out there, the kind of electrochemical, gravity, hydro, mechanical, basically everything that's out there. And going through that, it just kind of became so important, that we recognize the difference in characteristics between all these different technologies. I like to think there's not one single silver bullet for everything. Each technology has its own advantages. At the end, it depends on the use case that you're trying to use it for. And being in a utility, there's a lot of use cases because we operate the electrical system. So there's we know how we're going to operate each type of energy storage facility. So we've embarked on, like Michael said, we've embarked on testing a lot of non-lithium systems with the help of our emerging technology organization. So we've tested the EOS system. We're working with Honeywell to kind of test their flow battery system. I think that's also been announced. So yeah, we're also looking at some nickel hydrogen systems that are hitting the market. So yeah, there's definitely a very wide array of technologies, and it's definitely it'll help us as an industry to look at all of them and test all of them to Michael's point.
Yeah. Just to maybe speak another route to get to how do you test this stuff? How do you get this going? And for Tampa Electric, joining a consortium was really a best route for us. Join the EPRI consortium around carbon resource initiatives, and it's looking at a wide range of potential solutions. There's going to be winners and losers, but it takes a lot of investment. And it's best done as a team effort, at least from our perspective.
And so EPRI, that's EPRI for the audience, right? And if they Google it, they'll see it's an organization that lots of different people can come into to help support that. I was at a conference last week where LADWP in Los Angeles was talking about it, joining that as well. So, that's just one example and a great point. It's not your responsibility, Patrick, but you can contribute to that from where you sit.
That's exactly it. It's a big enough problem where you got to work together with others to get it done. Yeah.
So can I just speak from an industry perspective? I think that you're exactly right. Lithium just happens to be the first technology to really scale energy storage, I think, in my mind. And if I know that not only our company, but others are developing energy platforms, energy storage platforms, meaning we are going to evolve technologies over time. It won't always be lithium. And so I think that's where the testing is going to be occurring, right? In our innovation labs. I'm sure Michael's organization, Sharif's, mine, we're all going to be testing new products to see how they perform in our systems. And then it's going to be up to us to step up to those kind of performance guarantees that customers are looking for, like Patrick and Sharif.
Thank you. Yeah, you've all painted a pretty complex landscape, of energy storage, which it really is. There's so many factors in it. So, at the risk of making a bit of a controversial statement here, would you say energy storage is more of a palliative rather than a panacea? In other words, is it really a stepping stone? And if so, is it towards what? And if it's not, then what do we need to do in addition to some of the stuff you guys have brought up to really ensure the success and viability of energy storage?
That's a great question, Saul. I love how you put it. So, I think it depends, right? It depends upon what is the function that you're trying to get to. In terms of palliative, I mean, if you're thinking lithium is the end game, I think we just, I think came to a pretty good conclusion that, it is just a palliative in that sense. The real end game to replace all of this fossil generation, which has storage capability, you've got to replace it with something else. And lithium just doesn't seem like it can get there. You've got to have a mix of energy transformation plus storage, right? And the form of storage has got to be thought of broader. And that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, and I think our journey it's so complex that it's definitely going to be taken in steps. So I think that end game is a perfect comment, Patrick, to answer that overall. But if we even zoom in to like more of like a shorter medium term, solar was not cheap enough. No one thought it would really compete to where it did, or maybe very few did. And now it's at the point where the solar's able to be deployed where the marginal value during peak time is almost zero. So that's what's really driving our industry right now, in addition to sort of the price point we're at, is okay, in areas now we have the famous, duck curve with that neck ramp. When the sun's coming down, people are still using a lot of power. And so now we see a lot of 4-hour batteries, because that's somewhere around, my belief is that 4 hours comes from mostly that neck that we see, the 5 to 9 or 4 to 8 sort of time periods. But let's fast forward through that, right? We deploy a lot of solar with 4-hour batteries. Now that 5th hour is probably going to be that marginal hour where it's going to be a problem, or that 6th hour. So now people are going to start looking at 8 hours at that point. Maybe there's a morning bump. Then you start dealing with state of charge challenges like Sharif was talking about, in terms of keeping it at a higher state of charge longer because you're storing it overnight. So it's definitely a journey, I think, for us.
Yeah, thank you. I just brought up a slide just so people can visualize what we're talking about in terms of that curve. And Michael, I think you were talking about this right here, 4 hours in order to handle something where there's a dip by PV. Am I correct in understanding this?
I think what I'm more saying is what we're trying to do is gather the belly of the duck, which is basically where, so this is basically the inverse of a solar curve, right? So we're trying to take that peak power and shorten that ramp. What's making grid operators, and I'm sure Patrick could, or Sharif has more experience with this personally, but that ramp of that neck when power is being used, that's a really challenging ramp, and that's what 4-hour batteries are really designed to do right now is make that belly come up a little bit and make that neck come down a little bit. So it's, grid operators like this, and that's not what you're seeing here.
Yeah, they
And
don't like
so,
change.
yeah, and so if we put a ton of 4-hour batteries there and solve that neck, the shape's going to change, and there's going to be a different part of it. We'll call it another animal, and it'll be a different challenge.
That makes sense. Thank you. You guys also talked about just moving into the economics of battery storage. As you mentioned, solar started this downward trajectory in cost, PV that is, some time ago, and now we're starting to see that with energy storage more and more so. So is this the primary, in addition to the use cases like this that we just talked about, are these the primary motivators for now deploying energy storage? And what else would you say is also motivating us in terms of getting forward?
Yeah, I would just like to say, I think even though the cost down curve for energy storage and solar is encouraging and obviously moving this whole industry along, what I think is even pushing even further is just the renewable penetration, right? I mean, we have all this energy, clipped energy, wasted energy that's not being captured in these wind and solar fields. And so most of the projects I'm working on now are actually coupled with those renewable resources, right? And so that's by far what's driving us forward in terms of deployments in my mind.
Yeah, no, that's really, I think, right on. For Tampa Electric, solar was not a capacity play. So, demand was an energy play, right? The energy was cheaper from solar than the next best alternative, natural gas combined cycle. As energy prices, natural gas goes up, it's going to make us think about other alternatives. We're going to keep picking low-hanging fruit like, hey, if I'm clipping energy on some of these solar sites, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to build some storage to capture that. You can cost justify that. The cost justification equation will continue to change and will get harder as we continue to progress down the net zero objective. So,
So if I'm hearing you guys correctly, you're saying solar and wind have been so successful from a price point that they're being deployed at scale, but that creates the when problem of we don't control the sun and the wind in the same way we could control traditional generation technologies. And so very simply, energy storage helps answer the when question of taking that energy when we need it.
no, that's exactly right. I'll throw in the storage has some unique characteristics to help out in other areas as our grid gets more complex and flexible. We see solar in communities, we see microgrids, all those things work together. And so I would continue to point to that range of solutions, and it's a range of storage capabilities. But yeah, definitely in these early stages at utility scale, yeah, that's you hit it right on the head.
Yeah, so it gets back to that question, right? Is energy storage a nice to have? No, I think it's a foundation of a renewable energy landscape. You have to have it in order to solve that wind problem.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one thing. I definitely agree. The enablement of renewables, especially as it gets, both solar and wind get cheaper and cheaper. One very prominent use case and application we've found for energy storage systems, as a vertically integrated utility, has been basically reliability improvement for either disadvantaged customers at end of long radial feeders. They may be disadvantaged, may not be disadvantaged, but there's a lot of cases if you operate a utility and you operate a very vast distribution system, there's a lot of cases where there are long radial feeders that traverse through very challenging terrain, and it is cost prohibitive to have underground cables for 10 or 20 miles. So you end up putting it overhead, but with that comes very high unreliability, and really the alternative, like I said, is very cost prohibitive until you have a battery system that you can put at the end of that feeder, and whenever these outages occur, you back up that town. So we found a lot of opportunities or cases on our grid where we could deploy that as a solution. Sol, I think you worked on a project through your previous role with Duke to kind of help out with that. Michael Wartsila kind of built that project for us, Hot Springs in Western North Carolina, the one I'm referring to. But there's many, many more like that where just energy storage is the only solution for reliability improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think resiliency is hard to quantify sometimes, but when you don't have it, you really, really feel it. And so I think you're right. From just a dollar and cents perspective, it sounds like there's cases where the utility is going to benefit from doing a microgrid type technology play rather than overhead lines. But it's not just like a cost for reliability there, but PG&E in California has a lot of issues. Wildfires, I don't know if anyone heard, have been like somewhat of a problem in California over the last several years, and PG&E has a program to replace end-of-line remote places in certain wildfire areas, but for a little bit of a different purpose. It's more simply to not have to deal with all the trees that are running into the lines along that whole line. So it's somewhat of a reliability play, but it's also a safety play.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm hearing from you guys in terms of complexity of what we're dealing with right here is the need for convergence. And what's going on is we've got renewables, we've got conventional generation, we've got all sorts of things. And now, from what I'm hearing from you, is there's an opportunity for converging. And I'll try to share my screen right here. I guess it's not quite coming across. Of converging these disparate technologies together through whether it's through microgrids, whether it's through whatever it may be, like such as what you can see on this screen right here, where you've got your solar, you've got your conventional, you've got your controllable loads. Now there's perhaps interaction between the load side as well as the generation side. I know that's a in and of itself, but I'm curious now, kind of that. So if we are to get to like 100 gigawatts of new energy storage within this decade, what does that path look like? And what do we need to do to meet our carbon reduction goals with municipalities and utilities?
Well, go ahead, Patrick.
Well, I was chuckling because, Sol, if you've got an answer for that, we'll hire you for that project. I think we've laid it out there that we definitely don't know what the answer is, but we've got a lot of potential opportunities. We're going to continue to, work in consortiums like the EPRI consortium and begin to get a feel for what technologies make sense. In the short term, we're able to manage our systems with significant amount of renewable on our system. But we know to get to that next step where we significantly reduce our fossil generation, we're going to need other storage solutions. And what are those storage solutions? That we've got 5 or 6 that are on the plate right now that we're going to test, but I don't know for sure.
And I would just say, so there were sort of 2 questions there. You had the slide up that was talking about the technologies. I didn't necessarily see EVs on there, but now you have those. So that's a changing landscape. But I think I'd rather focus on the second part of your question, which is more the like, how do we get to 100 gigawatts? Which, I mean, it sounds massive right now. And, I think it's people that are very smart, really focusing on the biggest challenges one at a time. And let me just give one such example. Um, are we even able to get through the interconnection bottleneck to even do that? Um, Again, we could, it's different in every market, which is its own challenge, that there's not a lot of consistency between interconnection or permits in general, if for HJ approvals across the country. So, but let's put that aside. Speaking specifically to interconnection, take California. Um, the CAISO is doing the best they can with a lot of these things. They have a team. They used to get 15 to 25 applications a year, or rather, maybe we're focusing into some of the utilities, not the CAISO. But my point being, pre solar boom, they'd be looking at 15 to 25 impact studies a year for new generation requests. That number's like 258 now, and their team hasn't necessarily changed. And so some areas of the country have an interconnection that's sequential, which just takes forever. Some have tried to speed it up by doing clusters, which seems to be breaking as well. And the thing is we're not even deploying nearly at the scale of the pace that we're talking about to get to that 100 gigawatts soon. So, that's one such example. I don't have the answer, but we need to, partially it's a resources question, but partially it's probably a methodology question to help, our stakeholders dealing with interconnection to help manage those queues a little bit better. I don't know anywhere in the country where people are like, interconnection, great. It's a real challenge for our development partners.
Michael, have you seen much in the distribution side popping up as a result of constraints you might see hitting the transmission side of the house?
At Wartsila, and at Nextracker, I've focused dramatically more on the utility scale transmission side. When I was at Tesla and in a previous life at Solar City as well, there was a lot more CNI. I can say that the infrastructure at the CNI and residential level also needs a lot of upgrades. So for example, main panels probably aren't ready for solar and storage and EV loads. They were designed for lights and air conditioning and a few other things. So I think there's a lot of distribution infrastructure that people will need to upgrade as a lot more of our life is electrified. I'm just not as familiar with that concept, other than personally having an EV and trying to kind of understand that in my own life. It's been a few years.
I think you're right on. There's constraints on the distribution side as well. We weren't built for bi-directional power flow. So.
And how is that from a utility side? How do you manage that?
Yeah, the burden goes to who wants to build the new community solar plant, or significantly. We've got a lot of, Bitcoin mining and, digital currency mining coming into the area. And that burden falls to those that want to move into and produce those, new capabilities, whether it's storage or load or whatever it might be. So the constraint is the same, but a little bit different. There is a constraint on both sides, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, one of the benefits, though, that energy storage has over conventional generation of the past is that the solutions we're bringing to these problems of interconnecting with distribution or transmission are more easily solved with products. So we don't have to develop custom solutions. We can take an off-the-shelf product, plug it in, and solve that kind of distribution problem or whatever other problem we're trying to solve for much more easily than solving a custom solution of the past. And that's really going to be key in getting us to move forward faster.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. And I'm happy kind of Michael, Patrick and Ivan, you all touched on interconnection, specifically on the distribution side. I think, definitely not speaking for, Duke Energy interconnection, because I'm just a different part of the house. But, one thing that needs to be recognized in energy storage interconnections is that it is not at all similar to solar interconnections. Specifically on the distribution side, connecting a 5 megawatt battery is not the same as connecting a 5 megawatt solar facility, in that your battery asset is totally dispatchable. You have the capability, Ivan, like you said, through solutions and through communications to avoid times where your asset will cause an overload. So, what we're used to kind of on the solar side, where you get a capacity limitation, for your interconnection, doesn't or shouldn't necessarily apply to a similar battery facility, since you can simply not dispatch or not discharge or charge during the time of that contingency or peak load or valley load that would cause an overload.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you make some good points. I mean, just the fact that storage is both a load or a generation capacity, like the definitions didn't even exist before energy storage, right? So I can only imagine from your seats a challenge that brings from even contemplating an interconnection piece. It's other generations, they're a generation, not potentially both.
I'm not even going to mention the regulation side of it. We still pay out retail for generation on the customer side. So.
Yeah, I feel there's so much more we can explore in areas in terms of policy, in terms of standards, the economics, the regulation. I know we're coming up on the hour right here, so we could easily go on for another couple of hours or so. But there are some good questions that have come in that I'd like to jump to shortly. But before we do so, perhaps each of you can just quickly share some success stories. Some case studies or success stories that you have as it relates to energy storage.
Sure, I'll briefly kick it off. In my intro slide, I showed a quick picture of our utility scale storage that we have, right around 13. Yeah, there you go. Right around 13 megawatt capability. The successes are really learning how to own and operate a battery system. It's a completely new technology. There's a lot more to it than just design it, put it on the ground, and let it run. Cooling, big piece of it. Optimizing the controls for charge, discharge, understanding the best applications for it. We've spent 2 years, a little over 2 years now, focused on testing various use cases with this battery system. And that learning has really been the success. We know a lot more about how best to utilize a system like this, and I'll leave it at that. Learning is the best use case we found here.
For me, so if you want to go to my slide, I think a success story I'd like to mention is basically that project at the top, Hot Springs, basically. So we're planning to commission that project to operate in islanded mode this year. So I think the success story there is kind of finally being able to improve reliability for customers of that town this year, and just helping them avoid kind of 2 and 3 hours of outage at a time. I think that's going to be a big milestone for Duke Energy and for us as a renewables organization. So can't wait for that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Saul. So look, I think the value of this slide is really just to explain the fact that, again, energy storage at scale. We just finished commissioning our largest project. On the top left of that slide is a project in California for a large developer in the country, and it's a 4-hour, 352 megawatt hour system. And this is exceptional in February of 2022. But the story is this is going to be typical, and if not eclipsed, in 2022. And so that's just where we're going. It's an example. And again, renewable penetration is what's driving this demand for coupled storage.
Yeah, great. And then, and I'll also start trying to answer some of these in the chat as we continue here. Some really good questions, but yeah, just one simple success story. It sounds really easy to be like, here's solar, here's storage, capture it, move it, yay. But that's not how the revenue streams in the markets work. And so here's an example we have of a DC coupled project where we have what's called IntelliBidder, which is our software product that helps to optimize revenues for the project and sort of be able to forecast the weather and help create firm bids in a marketplace. And so as we productize solar and storage, we don't want this curve that's solar has been exactly. We want to break that into, it's never going to be, like we said, like the utilities happy, like flat chunks again, but maybe we can make them a little bit more blocky and predictable so that the ramps aren't as tough to manage, and the other generation resources that may take longer to turn on and turn off or have different kinds of start-stop capabilities can be managed more efficiently. Just one example.
Yes, thank you for that. That really helps kind of put into the limelight what each of you is doing and kind of give it a tangible feel. I think we can switch over to the questions. One question that came up, and I think we were meaning to address this as well, was what criteria or metrics would we recommend keeping an eye on when evaluating different types of alternative energy storage technologies like flow batteries, gravity, liquefied, and so on. As we discussed, there are kind of 4 general categories of energy storage, but what metrics would we use even across these different categories?
I'll just mention one because it very, very often gets forgotten because we take it for granted with lithium systems. It is self-discharge or capacity retention. So when you leave a battery kind of without kind of charging it or discharging it, how much percentage energy does it lose on a daily basis or over time? Mm-hmm. Also, I'll add round trip efficiency to the mix. We enjoy a good kind of probably 96 or 94% efficiency, round trip efficiency for lithium systems at the battery terminal, not at the point of interconnect. So, that's also something to keep an eye on as we evaluate other technologies.
Yeah, and I think that question's hard to answer without knowing the background or the role of the people asking it. If I were a financier, I'd be looking for a data track record, bankability of the company, how valuable those guarantees are. If I'm more of a performance engineer, I'm probably looking more at things like round trip efficiency. Sharif talked about some of the self-discharge capabilities, aux load. If I'm a AHJ or like a fire or safety person, what are the consequences if something goes sideways with that technology? Is it flammable or not? Is it toxic or not? Things like that, right? So it really depends on the question, on the role of the person, but a lot of things to evaluate.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. So kind of related to that, and I think what we just talked about can be used to help address this next question, and that is, what will companies want to bet on new energy storage technologies? And I think, Michael, you were already attempting to answer that in terms of evaluating new energy technology. So we'll use those metrics to do that. But what else would compel a company or a firm or whatever to bet on new energy storage technologies, would you say?
Well, I was just saying in the chat that there's too much money and need for people to not bet on it. But I would argue why do we have venture capitalists for apps and whatnot in general? If someone can bet early on a technology and get an advantage in the marketplace for the next technology, they're going to have an extreme advantage, right? So that might be one reason why people would bet on what the next big thing is.
And kind of related to that, would it then be fair to say it may not just be the technology itself, but the software, the intelligence also related to that, that can help make an energy storage system a compelling solution? So raw technology by itself is great, but maybe we have also issues related to how that's being deployed and managed. Is that something, a fair thing to say as well?
Without a doubt, Saul. I mean, you look at the grid of the future, it's much more interconnected, much more data, bi-directional flows. The complexity of the problem is much better. So the opportunities for solutions are far more diverse. And I think that kind of brings it together there.
Great. So we'll go a little bit above the hour for those who would like to stick around. We'll answer a couple more questions, and then I'd love to hear some closing remarks from all of you guys as well. So I think another question that I'm seeing here is, have we accounted for extreme weather such as hurricanes, given the vulnerability of solar and storage assets against it? Are you considering storage as a hedge?
Interesting question, right? I mean, storage is relatively short term when compared to risk of hurricanes over a life of a solar plant. But we certainly designed, being in Florida, we designed to expect hurricanes. If the really big one comes, it will likely cause some, serious damage. But again, it's a risk judgment, and that's how we approached it.
Yeah, and I would just say with extreme weather, it puts everything at risk, right? So the concepts of N+1 or N+2 to get transmission into like a load zone that's hard to access, that's always been a piece of this. And so I think just as the technology changes, grid operators are going to think about that kind of redundancy. The risk is a little more complicated now because it's not just transmission. You may get enough storage in an area, but do you have enough generation there as well, right? It's probably easier to put a bunch of batteries in a load zone than it is to put the equivalent amount of solar to power those batteries, for example. So there's definitely some complexities that come with resiliency. And obviously extreme weather exacerbating that. But that's why I think like thinking about these products, again, my focus is mostly utility scale, but people are investing in resiliency products for their home or their business. A lot of EVs are talking about being bi-directional and being able to help you island for your home. So I think as we ride these cost curves, which may fluctuate, but will hopefully go down, hopefully there's a lot better access to these products if you're in an at-risk area.
And I'll just add, that's a great question. Actually, one of our projects, just pure energy storage without solar, it's basically a solution to the problem of hurricanes. So it powers a hurricane evacuation shelter in case the utility wires go out in inclement weather situations. So that project is kind of planned to be commissioned in 2023. So certainly looking forward to that as a solution, and looking forward to kind of more and more of these projects that solve these very, very real problems.
And I think when we think about extreme weather, it's easy to think about what are you doing during it? But I think it's also really important to think about the recovery. And energy storage has black start capabilities, for example. So as the grid comes around this type of technology more, the sequencing of powering the grid back up may become easier, although maybe I'm at risk of burying my engineers in very challenging black start requirements. But from a technology perspective, I think energy storage can help a grid recover.
Well, I think we're all just talking about distributed energy, right? And I think contrary to what we've done in the past and having this centralized power generation, all our eggs in one basket, we don't have to worry as much if our energy is distributed, and we can recover quicker if we have those buffers of energy storage distributed.
Thank you. Great guys. There's one more question we'll take right here and then go into our closing remarks. And lithium battery technologies have set the baseline and expectation in the industry at operating at 1 cycle per day max. How do you view upcoming non-lithium technologies that can operate flexibility from 2 to 10 hours in back-to-back, et cetera, cycles, tapping into multiple cycles per day? How do you see IPP, independent power producers, and utilities being able to monetize battery energy storage that can truly operate multiple cycles per day?
I'm going to answer the first part of that question. I think it goes back to something we discussed, and that really with battery systems, you need to look at the full picture. And I should say with energy storage systems, not just battery systems, but with energy storage systems. So, the question kind of asks about nickel hydrogen batteries. So that's definitely an awesome, very, very promising technology. And I shouldn't say promising because it's already very, very well proven since the 1970s. And it does offer kind of advantageous cycle life. I think 30,000 cycles plus 10 times as lithium. But it's also important to see kind of the other characteristics. How does it perform kind of round trip efficiency wise? How does it perform self-discharge wise? Not saying that these are disadvantages that should render us to not use it. Just these are aspects that should inform us where the best location and application for a technology like this is. So there's definitely, I'll definitely not make a statement that lithium is the holy grail and it is great for everything. It is great for some applications, and nickel hydrogen batteries are certainly going to be great for other applications. It's just important for us to model things properly and use things where they're most likely to succeed.
Yeah, no, Sharif, I think you're right on. It goes down to the function, right? And what is the value of that function? I mentioned earlier smoothing of the output of a solar plant, right? Something that can cycle repeatedly would be much more advantageous as long as it has a good cost point. Mm-hmm. So depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think we see the markets get shaped based loosely on some of those goals and what you're trying to do. And I think those market signals, IPPs are going to cycle the battery in the way that makes them the most money, it seems like, right? Possibly utilities, although maybe it's more of a value equation there as well. And so as long as markets are getting designed to be around 1 cycle a day, that's what we're going to typically see. I think there are instances where that's not necessarily the case. I think frequency regulation in the Northeast or valuable sort of merchant streams in like ERCOT, for example, are common ones where we may see higher cycling. But then the question becomes, is it at the price point, and how deep are those markets, right? If everyone floods to them, does the merchant revenue kind of balance out relatively quickly? So yeah, follow the money, and that usually drives the cycles.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we'll move on to the closing remarks now. Just a note for the audience: if you have further questions, please feel free to send them our way, to send them my way or Parker's way, and we'll make sure to take care of them. So now that we've covered a fair amount of terrain in a very condensed period of time, I'm curious what you guys have to say moving forward. What are your thoughts now where we sit, and what would you like to see? What were the thoughts? Sharif, if you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Sol, for organizing this panel, and thank you to McKim Creed. Like the last one, this has been amazing. My closing remark is just, where are the string inverters of batteries? With I just saw a product on LinkedIn from LS Energy. They seem to be coming out with a battery string inverter, which I can see being very, very valuable to enable augmentation. But where are the other inverter OEMs? Why aren't we seeing more string level inverters? So I'll just leave it at that.
Right. Michael, your thoughts?
I have thoughts on that, Sharif, but we can talk offline. I would say price, maybe. We have a long journey in front of us, and we're sitting here as experts now, but the truth of the matter is all four of us are going to be doing this in 5 years, and we're going to know a lot more than we did then. I certainly know more now than when I was doing storage in 2016 or 2017, right? And so I think it's really important that we all really just work together on really trying to solve the issues at hand and not necessarily just race in too aggressive of a way. And what I mean by that is, if we're too focused on just price and we're not focused on the bigger picture, we may push out technologies like we've talked about with the non-lithium stuff, but we also may not be in the most overall stable position. And where I'm leading with this is the supply chain. We're very concentrated in one country right now. The reason why we're concentrated in that one country is they have the lowest price point. And if we want to really shore up our security as a nation, we probably need to invest domestically, but we're going to have to pay more for that. And so that's the part everyone's like, let's shore up the supply chain. Well, there are consequences for that. And so I hope we're willing to make that investment in ourselves when the time comes.
Thank you, Michael. Ivan.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that because I couldn't agree more. I really think that while there is so much tremendous support right now from all industry stakeholders for energy storage, I think we've established that it's a necessary requirement for a reliable and efficient grid and a more cost-effective grid, right? All this peaking generation we use currently, it's not efficient. It's not emission friendly. So that has to be solved with energy storage. Again, these energy systems that we're all developing, they're going to evolve over time, and none of us are going anywhere. So it's a challenge we have to continue to chip away at, but I think we're going to continue to evolve very quickly.
Thank you, Patrick.
So I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. It's been really exciting conversation, and it really reminds me to go back to what are we trying to achieve, right? We want always on power. We want it to be carbon free, greenhouse free. That's a lofty challenge, and we have an incredible amount of change that's happening right now. The modernization of our grid, bidirectional flow of power, storage possibilities, and the larger energy framework when you start to think about hydrogen and all these other solutions. It's what I really think is exciting about it is everyone employing their creativity to find the most effective solution. At the end of the day, we could spend a lot of money on this. It could be really risky, or we can find a very effective solution as a team. It's going to take panels like this, teams working together to find that very complex solution. And I'm excited.
Thank you. There's so much to unpack in what all of you guys have said. I feel like we need to host a weekend retreat where all of us get together and invite others to, maybe in the Caribbean somewhere, I don't know. Yes, but this patchwork, it seems like we've gone as a community, as an industry, gone really deep in certain areas, but our understanding is still a little bit patchwork in which we tie and bring it all together with what I'm hearing from what you guys are saying. And what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years is pivotal in determining how all of this plays out, as it was for solar PV a few years ago. So I'm really grateful for having all of you here on the stage. And I think, I've certainly learned a lot, and I feel our audience has as well. And of course, in 1 hour, we can only cover so much, but just quickly, some of you mentioned some of the labs or the bodies within the United States, like EPRI and NREL and so on. This is, for those who want to dig a little bit deeper, there is an NREL, a report, a very comprehensive 120-page report on energy storage, cost benchmark, and energy storage models. So certainly we'll share the link to that here. NREL is one of the labs in the United States, but that goes into quite a lot of depth about the models, what we can expect, and what the economic payback and the economic costs are for all of this. So I would encourage that. So here we are now at the end, and I'm once again very grateful for all of you here together. Also want to give a shout out to the marketing team at McKim Creed, Parker and Kristen and Addie and others for really enabling all of this. So we're looking forward to having further and more dialogue as well, as is very much required. So thank you all, and we're looking forward to continuing the dialogue as we go forward. So we'll end. All right.